Okie dokie. Gould is talking about the Templeton Foundation um, conference, and he says, indeed, if we look at the so-called arguments for syncretism, melding science and religion together, as described in these reports, they all devolve into a series of fuzzy statements awash in metaphor and illogic. Consider just three examples, not chosen as egregiously silly, but representative of the standard fare. And then he lists them off. So he's going to be talking now about the teleological argument, and I'm going to say where I think he goes astray in his understanding of it and rejection of it. And this is, I think, him being guilty of the same thing he's faulting Richard Dawkins and others for, of caricaturizing um, the religious or a religious worldview. All right, the first example, number one, woolly metaphor misportrayed as decisive content. Newsweek reports the following fusion of Christ and quanta. Here's the quote from Newsweek. Take the difficult Christian concept of Jesus as both fully divine and fully human. It turns out that this duality has a parallel in quantum physics. In the early years of the century, physicists discovered that entities thought of as particles, elect, um, like electrons, can also act as waves. The orthodox interpretation of this strange situation is that light is simultaneously wave and particle. So too with Jesus, suggests physicist F. Russell Stannard of England's Open University. Jesus is not to be seen as really God in human guise, or as really human but acting divine, says Stannard. He was fully both. And then that completes the quote from Newsweek, and Gould continues, now what am I to make of such a claim that the status of Jesus as both God and man, a central Trinitarian concept, must be factually true because electrons and other basic components can be construed as either waves or particles? I don't see what such a comparison could indicate except that the human mind can embrace contradiction, an interesting point to be sure, but not a statement about the factual character of God, and that people can construct the wildest metaphors. Well, the analogy is just that. It's an analogy. We normally would think of particles as being not wave-like. We normally would think of waves as being not particles. But photons are both particles and waves, or at least they can be viewed in that way in like a model. And uh, so it's wave-like and particle-like. Even though those normally don't go together, there's no contradiction there because the light, uh, photons of light are a real phenomenon, and that which is contradictory is not real. That which is real is consistent, self-consistent. So um, that is an analogy. It's not an argument. It's not a proof. It doesn't establish anything theologically per se. It's just an interesting observation. Yes, we have something that has a kind of a bivalence in nature, and we also have that in Christianity. So to say that Jesus is both God and man is similar in some ways to the duality of photons. It's similar in that it's not just one or the other, but it is both. And it may not be a perfect analogy. I'm thinking that it probably isn't. But it is interesting that we have something other than Jesus who is bivalent like he is. So it doesn't prove the hypostatic union. It doesn't prove that Jesus is God. But that's not the intention. It's just saying, hey, we see this. There's some commonalities there. It's kind of interesting. Stick it in your back pocket. Go on with your day. But then when Gould says that the human mind uh, can embrace contradiction, well, that's really not quite true. I mean, uh, we can't really understand the self-contradictory because it's nonsense. It's meaningless. But the hypostatic union of Christ is not self-contradictory. The hypostatic union, you can have you can have. Let's see if I can remember this right. Um, Normally, you have just a human or just a God, and there's only one God. But in Jesus, you have God putting on humanity. So there's nothing in divinity that denies humanity. There's nothing in humanity that denies divinity. A human being, for example, is not omniscient normally, but that's not essentially part of what a human being is. That's an accident, to use the Aristotelian terminology. Um, the, the the essential thing that makes a man or a human is that we are rational animals. That's the definition of man. A man or a woman, a boy or a girl, is a rational animal. Rational animals usually aren't omniscient, but there's nothing that says a rational animal can't be omniscient. So, uh, in the hypostatic union, we have a rational animal who is omniscient, namely Jesus. So it's not a contradiction. There are some attributes that humans have um, that are part of their essential nature, but there's some that are accidental to their human nature. Another example would be born on Earth. It's possible that a human could be born on the moon, but it hasn't happened yet. It may happen someday, but it hasn't happened yet. So it's true that human beings aren't born on the moon, but that is not what makes a human a human. So if a human is born on the moon, that doesn't magically make them non-human. Um, so the hypostatic union, um, fully God and fully man, it's not a contradiction, um, like Gould says here. Okay, and then he goes on to number 2, clutching at straws based on superficial similarity. The Wall Street Journal presents the following 2 remarkable examples of the syncretist notion that science can validate spiritual claims. We learn, first of all, that Darwin himself was a closet syncretist. And now the quote from the Wall Street Journal. Surprisingly, among the first to reunite science and religion was Darwin. The participants argued that he destroyed the notion of God as an absent clockwinder, restoring the ever-present deity of the Psalms. As Arthur Peacock put it, Darwin permitted a recovered emphasis on ancient insights, showing that God was created all the time. That ends the quote from the Journal, Wall Street Journal. So the idea is that you have the deists who didn't really think God was involved very much with creation. He set up the universe like a clock. He wound it up, and then he left. But then with Darwinism, and now neo-Darwinism, we see God more active. It wasn't just 10,000 years ago He created things as they are. He was active behind the scenes, molding things to through evolutionary processes until we get to the present time. That's the idea of what they're saying here, I think. Gould writes, again, what am I supposed to conclude from such fuzziness? Has the factuality of an old-fashioned creating God been proven because Darwin used developmental language to describe the genealogical history of life? I thought that the God of many Christians confined this kind of creative activity to the early days of life's history, or is Mr. Peacock's God just retooling himself for the spiffy language of modern science? So 10 minutes is long enough. I'll comment on that in the next part.